Hey guys, tonight, we slip through the carved sandstone arches of Mughal India, stepping past guards in silk turbans and into a world most people were never meant to see. The air is warm with the scent of rosewater, heavy fabrics draped from ceilings like frozen waterfalls, and the light comes in fractured through intricate jolly screens, those latticed panels that hide more than they reveal. You're inside the zanana, the women's quarters, where the rules are invisible but absolute. This is a place where a glance can spark a rivalry, and a misplaced word can undo years of careful survival. You probably won't survive this, by the way, not unless you master the art of saying nothing and meaning everything. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? And what time is it for you? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The palace breathes differently here. Outside the emperor's court thrums with voices, officials, poets, generals debating under banners. Inside the zanana, it's a softer hum, slippered footsteps on marble bangles, chiming when women pass each other in narrow halls, the low rustle of gossip, spoken just loud enough for someone to overhear. Every corridor leads to a warren of rooms, some vast and perfumed, others small and plain, each holding a piece of the emperor's domestic world. The women here are not all queens. Many are wives by political alliance, others companions by favor, some servants who wear silk but carry trays. There's a hierarchy as precise as the Mughal court. Outside, only more opaque rank here isn't just title. It's proximity to the emperor's ear and how many people are willing to risk theirs to defend you. Through one corridor, you catch the shimmer of the harem's central garden. The Mughals adored gardens. They weren't just pretty, they were political statements, geometry made into living order. This one has marble paths lined with flowering jasmine, a small fountain whose water catches sunlight into 1,000 tiny diamonds, and beds of tulips that came all the way from Persia. You'd think the women here spend their days strolling peacefully among blossoms, but that's a painting you hang in a visitor's hall. Reality is more layered. A mainstream historical fact. The zanana was designed as both a sanctuary and a prison. It kept women safe from outside threats, but it also kept them firmly in place behind carved stone and guarded gates. Historians still argue whether it was more a gilded cage or a rare seat of quiet influence. After all, some women wielded enormous sway from behind these screens, shaping the empire in ways the chroniclers never wrote down. And the quirky tidbit. Some Mughal palaces hid tiny peepholes high in the jolly screens so the emperor could watch the court, or even military parades without being seen. The zanana was not cut off from power. It just had its own ways of seeing and being seen. Here sound becomes currency. A door closing too softly can be a secret. A sudden burst of laughter might be code for something less innocent. You pass a group of women embroidering a length of cloth so fine it could slide through a ring. Their hands never pause, but you can feel the words threading between them are sharper than the needles. And yes, there's humor in this world too. Dry, careful, the kind that lets you joke about the emperor's preference for mangoes without getting yourself relocated to a faraway fort. You overhear one woman telling another he likes his mangoes sliced so thin you can see through them. Pity he doesn't like his promises the same way. There's a quick burst of stifled laughter. You move on. Beyond the inner courtyard, a set of double doors leads deeper still into chambers where the air cools under painted ceilings. Murals of hunting scenes play out across the walls. Tigers, leaping deer, fleeing reminders that the man at the center of this world is both protector and predator. You can't help but think the women here have learned to be both too. At night, the zanana glows differently. Oil lamps flicker in niches, shadows ripple over mosaic floors, and the silence feels like it's holding its breath. Somewhere a musician plays the sitar for a favored consort, the melody rising and falling like a conversation half heard through walls. Elsewhere, a servant pads quietly to deliver a silver tray of pomegranate seeds to a woman whose name you've heard in whispers but never seen in daylight. The first thing you understand here is that everything has meaning: how much sandalwood oil a woman uses in her hair, whether her sandals are placed with toes in or out, even the order in which she enters the bathhouse. None of it is accidental, and none of it is for you to mistake if you plan on surviving long enough to matter. You pause by a balcony screened with carved marble looking out into the palace grounds beyond. You can see the faint movement of guards at the gates, the gleam of moonlight on the Yamuna River in the distance. Out there is freedom, or at least the idea of it. In here is the reality you'll have to live with. And in this place, reality comes with conditions you haven't even begun to count. She arrives without ceremony. No processions, no trumpets, no embroidered tent pitched outside the palace walls. Just a small palanquin swaying through the courtyard in the dim morning light, its curtains drawn its bearers, stepping quickly to avoid the gaze of anyone who might guess too much. You are standing far enough away to pretend you're not watching, but close enough to catch the shift in the air. The guards at the gate don't call her name because she doesn't have one worth announcing here. She's not the daughter of a powerful Rajput prince, not the niece of a Persian vizier, not even the sister of some minor ally who traded her for a treaty. She is as far as anyone in the Zenana knows the girl from nowhere. Her father, if the rumors are true, was a merchant of modest means. Spices, maybe. Or cloth. The details change depending on who's telling it. One woman swears she heard the family made its fortune selling indigo dye, another claims it was cheap glass beads for village markets. Either way, she doesn't arrive with the kind of dowry that bends the emperor's attention by sheer weight of gold. She arrives with what she can carry on her person: a few trunks of clothes, some hair ornaments, and her face. And yes, her face is enough to make the older wives shift uncomfortably in their silk cushions. She's not a flawless beauty, not the kind that painters immortalize in miniature portraits, but there's something there. A brightness to her eyes, a way of standing, that makes you think she's already measuring the room, weighing the people in it. Mainstream historical fact. Mughal emperors were known to take wives and consorts from wildly different backgrounds, sometimes elevating women from relatively humble origins to positions of influence. The empire's politics didn't run solely on bloodlines. It also ran on charm, wit, and the occasional coup of sheer luck. She's silent for most of her first day. Taken to a modest set of rooms, modest here meaning fewer than a dozen cushions, no personal fountain, and only one servant assigned to her directly, she disappears behind her door while the rest of the Zenana hums on. You wonder if she's crying or praying or simply lying there thinking about what her life has just become. But by evening she appears in the common hall. She's changed into a pale green sari threaded with silver, her hair coiled high with only a single pearl pin. It's understated compared to the other women glittering with gemstones, which might be the point. She doesn't try to dominate the room. She walks through it as if she's already part of the furniture. The quirky tidbit. Some Mughal Zenanas had what we might now call an initiation game. New arrivals, especially those without powerful family backers, would be given subtly impossible social tests, drinking tea without spilling a drop while seated on a slanted cushion, keeping a neutral face while listening to a fake rumor about themselves, or responding to a deliberately insulting compliment without giving offense. Fail, and you became an easy mark for petty rivalries. Pass, and you earned a cautious kind of respect. That evening, the girl from nowhere is offered a tray of sweets, each delicately shaped like a flower. She chooses one from the farthest edge, avoiding the central ones that might have been handled more, and smiles faintly at the servant who promptly stumbles and almost spills the rest. She catches the tray before it tips. The women nearby murmur she's passed one test already. Historians still argue whether women like her, those without noble origins, were ever truly free to rise in the zenana, or whether their success was always dependent on the emperor's fleeting interest. The official chronicles barely mention them unless they bore sons, and even then, the stories were often rewritten to make them seem less remarkable. But unofficially, their presence could unsettle the carefully balanced rivalries inside these walls. By the second day, she has visitors. Not the emperor, he rarely comes this quickly, but a cluster of women curious to see what she's made of. They arrive under the pretense of welcoming her, bringing small gifts, a vial of attar, a bolt of embroidered cloth, a plate of dried figs. You've seen these visits before. They're less about kindness and more about reconnaissance. They ask questions in a lilting, almost musical way, so the words feel harmless. Where is your family from? How long did you travel? Did you enjoy the gardens? And she answers just enough to be polite, never more. By the end of the week, she's been seen twice in the marble garden, once in the library, an unusual choice since few women venture there unless they're trying to impress someone, and once standing alone at a jolly screen overlooking the courtyard, watching the guards change shift. You start to think she might be one of those rare arrivals who doesn't wait for permission to exist here. But then you notice something else. She's careful with her servants, not just kind, but attentive. She learns their names quickly, thanks them when they bring water, and remembers which ones have relatives in the city. In a place where servants carry as much information as they do food and clothing, that kind of attention isn't just good manners, it's strategy. The nights here are cool, the air scented faintly with marigold and damp stone. From your own chamber, you can sometimes hear her singing softly. Not a court song, not one of the Persian ghazals favored by the poets, but something simpler maybe from her childhood. It's the sort of thing a mother might sing while rocking a baby to sleep. The sound carries down the corridor unnoticed by most, but you catch yourself pausing to listen. And you realize something: the girl from nowhere isn't trying to be noticed by the right people yet. She's letting the palace get used to her like someone easing into a cold pool. The real moves will come later if she survives long enough to make them. One evening, as the lamps are lit, you pass her in the corridor. She greets you with the same slight smile she gives everyone. But for the briefest second, her eyes meet yours, and you understand she's not here to fade into the marble. She's here to leave a mark, even if the historians never write her name. Morning in the zenana smells like cardamom tea and rose water, with just a hint of sandalwood smoke curling from the incense bowls along the corridors. The marble floors are cool under your bare feet as you pass the first stirrings of the day. Servants sweeping the soft splash of water in the bathhouse. A pair of young wives whispering over a tray of almonds. The girl from nowhere is already awake. You spot her in the garden, standing among the jasmine vines, as if she's part of them, her pale sari lifting slightly in the breeze. Life here at first glance looks like a languid dream. You'd think the women spent their days reclining on cushions, eating honeyed fruits, and idly twirling the ends of their silk scarves. And yes, there are moments like that. But the truth, this is a place of constant, invisible work. The labor isn't in lifting or sewing. It's in reading people, remembering slights, and preparing your next move before someone else moves first. Every day has its rhythms. After the morning baths and prayers, the women drift toward the central halls where the scent of breakfast parathas, stewed apricots, fresh curds pulls them together. Some take their meals in small groups, chatting lightly about weather or poetry. Others eat alone, their eyes sharp over the rim of their cups. Here, company is never accidental. You choose who to sit with the way a soldier chooses where to stand in battle. Mainstream historical fact. The Mughal Zanana could house hundreds of women, including wives, concubines, relatives, and attendants. At its peak, it functioned like a small city within the palace walls, with its own hierarchy, markets, artisans, and even guards, often women themselves trained in arms to keep order. The girl from nowhere is starting to find her place in this invisible map. She's not attaching herself to one faction yet, which is unusual. Normally, a newcomer will ally quickly, either with the older established wives who hold long memories and quiet grudges, or with the younger circle, whose beauty keeps them in the emperor's occasional orbit. She instead drifts between both, offering no commitments, but also no offense. This frustrates people. You can tell because the first rumors about her are starting to take shape. One says she refuses to eat meat because she's too delicate for court life. Another claims she has a secret letter from the emperor hidden under her mattress. A third, more absurd, suggests she can read Persian poetry without moving her lips, as if that's some kind of witchcraft. And the quirky tidbit: the women here sometimes pass notes using embroidery. A specific color or stitch in a shared piece of cloth could mean anything from "meet me by the fountain at night" to "do not trust the woman in the blue sari." You've seen cushions traded back and forth over weeks, carrying whole conversations hidden in silk threads. One afternoon, you find her in the shaded arcade, sitting cross-legged with a group of women embroidering a panel for a festival canopy. She works quickly, her stitches neat, but you notice she keeps glancing at the other's hands. When a servant brings sherbet, she accepts it with a nod and takes the smallest possible sip. Later, you overhear her politely declining a second cup. That's when it hits you, she's not just cautious about people. She's cautious about what goes into her mouth. Historians still argue whether poisoning in the Zanana was a genuine threat or just the stuff of whispered melodrama. There are official records of suspected cases, usually involving court politics spilling into the harem, but nothing conclusive enough to prove it was common. Still, in a place where sugar and saffron could mask almost anything, it's not paranoia to be careful. By evening, the palace feels heavier. The sky outside is streaked with orange and deep blue, and the marble walls glow faintly in the last light. You find yourself walking past her quarters again. This time the door is open, and you glimpse her bent over a low writing desk, a sheet of paper in front of her. Writing is a quiet rebellion here, not forbidden, but not encouraged for women without rank. She's holding the pen like it's an extension of her own hand, the ink pooling into curves you can't quite see. Later that night, the Zanana gathers for music. A court musician plays the sitar in the lamplight, the notes curling through the air like smoke. The girl from nowhere sits at the edge of the crowd, her eyes half closed, listening. When another wife leans toward her with a sly comment, she smiles faintly but doesn't reply. She's not giving anyone a foothold in her story yet, and yet she's noticed. The emperor hasn't summoned her, but his mother has walked past her twice in the garden this week. That's not an accident. The older woman's glance is the kind that weighs and measures. If she approves, it could mean opportunity. If she disapproves, it could mean an abrupt end to this girl's quiet game. There's a kind of chess being played here. Only the pieces are people, and the board is the palace itself. A seat at a poetry recital might mean an alliance. An invitation to the bathhouse could be a test. The girl from nowhere is moving carefully, not yet choosing her square, but making sure no one can push her off it. Before you go to sleep, you think of her in that garden again, how she seemed to breathe in the jasmine, as if memorizing its scent. Maybe she knows something the others don't, that the best way to survive here isn't to win every move, but to make the other players forget you're playing at all. You start to notice it after a few weeks, the way she slips through a room without leaving ripples. It's not that people ignore her, it's that she somehow gives them nothing to hold on to. No gossip, no clear alliances, no trace of whether she's pleased or offended. In a place where women survive by drawing attention or weaponizing charm, she's doing something strange. She's practicing the art of vanishing in plain sight. The mornings are still as elaborate as ever. Perfumed baths, layers of silk, the endless arranging of hair and jewels. But you see her wearing the same modest pair of pearl earrings more often than not. She never overdresses, never underdresses, always just enough to be appropriate, and never enough to spark envy. When she moves through the marble corridors, her anklets barely chime. The sound you hear is the faint swish of her sari against stone. Mainstream historical fact. In the Mughal zanana, invisibility could be a kind of armor. While some women used wit, beauty, or family connections to rise, others survived by being forgettable to those who might see them as competition. This was especially important when the emperor's favor could shift overnight, dragging the once adored into dangerous territory. One afternoon, the emperor hosts a private Mayfil, a gathering for poetry and music in one of the mirrored halls. You're there as an observer, standing just beyond the jolly screen, and you see her seated at the far edge, not in the circle of favored wives, but not banished to the back either. She listens intently to the recitations, occasionally lowering her eyes when someone important glances her way. The quirky tidbit. In some Mayfils, the poet would slip in verses that hinted at palace intrigue, using metaphors so layered only the most attentive listeners caught the meaning. A reference to a rose plucked too soon or a falcon circling without landing could send half the room glancing at the other half. She doesn't speak that night. She doesn't laugh at the subtle jokes, doesn't sigh at the sad verses. But she watches, really watches people's faces as they react. The quick smiles, the narrowed eyes, the glance that lingers too long. It's as if she's collecting a private map of the relationships here, drawing lines no one else sees. Historians still argue whether such quiet observation was a deliberate tactic, or simply the instinct of someone out of their depth. In her case, you're starting to believe it's deliberate. She knows she can't win by rushing forward, so she's learning the terrain before she moves. Her skill in disappearing isn't only about silence, it's about control. She never eats or drinks in public without testing something first. She keeps her servants close, but never too close, rotating their tasks, so no one knows her entire routine. She smiles at compliments, but never returns them with too much warmth. She speaks only when directly addressed, and even then she answers in a way that gives nothing away. Sometimes you catch her in the least expected places. Once in the library again, fingers trailing over the spines of Persian manuscripts. Once in the bathhouse, sitting quietly while the steam curled around her, like a veil, eyes half closed, as if she were somewhere else entirely. Another time at dusk on the outer balcony overlooking the Yamuna River, her face unreadable in the fading light. And here's something you've noticed. People underestimate what they can't define. Without a clear role in the palace's web, she's like an unmarked square on the chessboard. Dangerous only if you forget it's there until too late. A few women have tried to draw her in. One invites her to a late-night henna gathering, hoping to pry loose a story. Another accidentally leaves a jeweled hairpin in her chamber, waiting to see if she'll claim it or return it. She accepts the henna, but leaves early with a polite excuse. She returns the hairpin without comment, wrapped neatly in a silk handkerchief. Both attempts fail to produce the gossip they were meant to spark. In the evenings, when the palace grows quiet, you imagine her alone in her room. Maybe she's writing again the way you saw her once. Maybe she's thinking about the world outside the gates, the streets of her childhood, the smell of her mother's kitchen. Or maybe she's rehearsing every word and gesture for the day she decides to stop disappearing. The longer she remains like this, the more the others stop trying. They turn their attention back to the usual games, positioning themselves near the emperor, at festivals trading favors, staging small performances of charm. She lets them. The less they see her, the more they forget to watch her. There's a paradox in this kind of survival: the better you are at it, the less anyone remembers you were here at all. And maybe that's her intention. Or maybe it's just the only card she can play until the game shifts in her favor. One night, while walking the garden paths lit by oil lamps, you see her again. She's standing near the fountain, the water casting rippling light over her face. For once, she doesn't notice you. She's looking up at the night sky, and there's a softness there, like she's letting herself be unguarded for the first time in weeks. Then she turns, sees you, and the mask slides back into place. You both nod in silence. And in that moment, you understand the art of disappearing isn't about vanishing completely. It's about making sure that when you do appear, it's entirely on your own terms. The shift happens so subtly that at first you almost miss it. It begins with a seat. Not just any seat, but one at the Emperor's evening Mayfield, positioned 2 places closer to him than before. The hierarchy of seating here is as rigid as the palace architecture. You don't move closer unless someone has pulled you forward. She arrives, as she always does, without spectacle, dressed in a sari of deep indigo, with only a thin border of gold thread. Nothing ostentatious. But the color is unusual, reserved in certain courts for women the Emperor wishes to notice. She sits, and you see the slight tilt of the Emperor's head when he glances at her. It's not a long look, but it's enough to send ripples through the women nearest to him. Mainstream historical fact. Mughal emperors were known for moments of sudden concentrated favor. A woman could be almost invisible one month and showered with gifts, the next embroidered robes, jeweled bangles, trays of rare fruits. Sometimes the favor lasted years. Other times it faded in a season. Her first token comes a week later, a silver anklet inlaid with turquoise. It's not grand enough to provoke jealousy that could turn dangerous, but it's significant enough to mark her as someone to watch. She wears it only at night in the Emperor's presence, never in the common halls. The others notice this restraint, and it both irritates and disarms them. The quirky tidbit. Some gifts from the Emperor carried subtle messages. A mango could mean he longed for summer. A bolt of Kashmiri shawl wool could mean he expected her to be patient through a coming absence. Jewelry with turquoise often hinted at protection, the stone believed to guard the wearer from ill will. Whether he meant that or not, the message is there. One evening during the monsoon, the Emperor invites her to walk in the marble garden under the covered arcade. You see them from a distance, he gesturing toward the rain pooling in the lotus basins, she listening with her head slightly inclined. There is no laughter, no theatrical display, just the slow pacing of 2 people speaking low enough that the sound dissolves in the rain. Historians still argue whether these moments of intimacy in the harem were genuine affection or calculated performance. The truth is probably both. In her case, whatever passes between them isn't visible to anyone else, and she keeps it that way. The next day, she receives a set of miniature paintings, delicate Persian-style works, depicting gardens in bloom, each one framed in carved sandalwood. You hear that she's placed them in her private chamber facing her bed, so they're the last thing she sees at night. Whether this is sentiment or strategy is impossible to tell. Her new position brings more than gifts. It brings invitations to dine in smaller gatherings with the Emperor's mother, to attend private recitations of poetry, to join in the evening games of pachisi, where fortunes and tempers are won and lost on the throw of cowrie shells. But favor here is a double-edged sword. For every quiet smile she earns from the Emperor, she earns 2 sidelong glances from women who once ignored her. Some begin to make subtle moves, offering her sweetmeats at odd hours, inviting her to share gossip about a third party, or asking her to pass a message to the Emperor in her own words. She declines most of these with polite excuses, but even polite refusals leave marks. It's in the games that you see her most clearly. Pachisi isn't just about chance. It's about knowing when to push forward and when to let someone else's peace take the risk. She plays with care, never winning too quickly, sometimes even allowing another to claim a victory. This, you realize, is how she's treating the Emperor's favor not as a race to the end, but as a long game. One humid evening, the Emperor gifts her a small carved ivory comb, saying nothing more than, "It reminded me of you." The room hears this, and the silence afterward is almost audible. Ivory is rare, expensive, and though no one will say it aloud, delicate. Too much force and it snaps. The metaphor is there for anyone willing to see it. In the following weeks, her quarters expand. She's moved into a suite with its own private balcony overlooking the palace's north gardens. This is where you see her most now, often at dawn, sipping tea, as the light spills over the domes and minarets. She's not showing her triumph. She's storing it quietly, as if she knows the weather here changes fast. One night, after a late court performance of music, you find her alone in the hallway. She's holding a folded piece of parchment, the edges darkened by the oil lamp she's passing under. She doesn't hide it from you, but she doesn't offer an explanation either. You imagine it's a note from the Emperor, or perhaps from someone else entirely. In a palace where alliances shift with the seasons, it could mean anything. The days take on a new rhythm for her now. Morning visits to the garden, afternoons at the embroidery halls where she works with a group that now defers to her without question, evenings in the Emperor's presence. But she never seems intoxicated by it. The girl who once practiced vanishing hasn't forgotten how to do it. She just chooses when. That's what keeps her safe for now. In the harem, being too visible is as dangerous as being too invisible. She's found the narrow path between them, walking it with the precision of someone who knows one misstep could undo everything. And watching her now with that silver anklet catching the light. You wonder, is she still playing the same game as before? Or has she quietly switched boards without anyone realizing? It starts with a rumor. Not about her, at least not directly, but about a servant in her quarters. The girl is accused of slipping a letter to one of the palace guards, an offense that, depending on the content, could be nothing, or could be enough to see her whipped, banished, or worse. No one outside the Zenana knows what the letter said, but here within the carved walls and perfumed air, the meaning hardly matters. A rumor is a spark. The trick is deciding whether to smother it or let it burn. The girl from nowhere chooses neither. She listens, nods once, and says she will handle it. By the next day, the servant is gone, transferred without fuss to the laundry rooms far from the Emperor's wing. There's no public reprimand, no apology. Just absence. And because there's no scene to feed on, the rumor dies faster than it started. But not everything in the Zenana dies so easily. Mainstream historical fact. The Mughal harem was not a sealed-off, passive household. It was a political stage. Disputes between women could spill into matters of succession influence, and even diplomatic ties, especially when noble families had daughters inside the palace. A whisper about someone's loyalty could be as dangerous as an army on the march. The quirky tidbit. Some Zenanas had their own informal investigators, women who specialized in finding out the truth behind an accusation. They didn't wear uniforms or carry titles, but their word could determine whether someone was quietly moved to lesser quarters or quietly moved out of the palace altogether. It's one of these unofficial enforcers who comes calling on the girl from nowhere. A tall woman with hair streaked in silver, she arrives under the guise of borrowing a shawl pattern. The conversation is polite but layered. Questions are asked not for the answers, but to watch how they're given. You can almost feel the testing, the measuring of whether this newcomer's sudden rise is based on merit or on something worth dismantling. The girl answers each question without flinching, never over-explaining, never giving more than a sentence. She offers tea, but only after pouring herself a cup first. She laughs once, lightly, not too long, at a remark about the unpredictability of the Emperor's moods. And when the older woman leaves, there's no sign of tension in the room, but you know she'll report that here is someone not easily shaken. Historians still argue whether these internal checks kept the Zenana stable or simply bred more paranoia. Stability was always temporary here. The palace was built on a foundation of shifting sands, and every woman inside knew it. That same week, the monsoon storms arrive in full force. The marble corridors gleam with rainwater carried in on sandals, and the air smells of wet earth and crushed leaves. One evening, thunder rolls over the city. As the emperor holds court in a smaller hall, his closest companions gathered for a game of Chaucer. The girl from nowhere is there, seated near him, her sari, the color of pale saffron. The game is interrupted by a messenger, something urgent in the outer court. The emperor leaves abruptly, the room left in the awkward silence of people pretending not to wonder what just happened. Later you hear it was a dispute between two governors, nothing to do with the harem. But in his absence, the air shifts. One of the younger wives, known for her sharp tongue, seizes the moment. She remarks loud enough for the right ears that some people seem to get all the attention for doing very little. It's not aimed at the girl from nowhere by name, but the glance that follows makes the target clear. You watch the girl's reaction closely. She doesn't bristle. She doesn't defend herself. She simply smiles faintly, as if amused, and turns her head to study the rain falling beyond the arches. The conversation falters, then drifts elsewhere. A direct confrontation would have fed the tension. By refusing to engage, she leaves the insult to collapse under its own weight. But storms don't end in a single strike of lightning. They rumble on, finding new places to flash. Within days, another whisper surfaces that the emperor's mother has begun to question whether this new favorite is suitable. No one can define what suitable means, and that's the point. Vague criticism is harder to refute. That night, you find her alone in the north garden, walking the narrow path between the rain-darkened hedges. The lamps are few, the shadows deep. She looks up when she hears you, and for a moment you see something different in her expression, something sharper, colder. This place, she says quietly, rewards those who fight in the open. It buries those who fight in the dark. Then she turns back to the path, leaving you to wonder which one she intends to be. Over the next weeks, her appearances with the emperor are more frequent, but shorter. She no longer stays for entire evenings, instead excusing herself early with a smile and a bow. At first it seems like a retreat, but then you notice she's spending more time in the embroidery halls, surrounded by women who control the flow of clothing and fabrics through the palace. If someone were building a network of quiet allies, this would be a good place to start. The rains ease at last, leaving the gardens lush and the air heavy with growth. The palace settles into its late monsoon rhythm, long afternoons, slow evenings, a sense of waiting for something. You can feel it too, though you can't yet tell whether it's a beginning or an ending. In the Zenana, storms rarely pass without leaving something behind. Sometimes it's damage, sometimes opportunity, and sometimes it's both. The night it happens, the palace is unnaturally still. No music drifts from the outer courts. No murmured conversations spill into the corridors. Even the fountains seem quieter, their trickle dulled by the weight in the air. You feel it in your skin. Before you understand it, something has shifted. Her door stays closed long after the lamps are lit. By the time you pass the corridor again, the guards who usually linger at a respectful distance have moved closer, standing in a way that suggests they're not there for protection anymore. You don't need to ask to know the emperor will not be visiting her tonight. Mainstream historical fact. In the Mughal Zenana, the emperor's nightly choice of whose chamber to visit was as much a political act as a personal one. A single skipped visit could be a message to her, to the other wives, to the court outside. And sometimes it was the beginning of the end. When she finally appears, it's in the main hall. and it's clear she's prepared for the eyes waiting for her. Her sari is plain white muslin, unadorned, her hair uncoiled down her back. No pearls, no anklets, no trace of the silver one he once gave her. She walks the length of the hall without looking at anyone, then sits in the farthest corner and begins threading a needle as if her hands are too occupied to acknowledge the silence around her. The quirky tidbit. On certain nights, women in the zenana would deliberately wear white not as a mark of mourning, but as a subtle declaration that they were untouchable, spiritually removed from the games and gossip. It was both a shield and a statement: you cannot draw me into your war tonight. No one knows why the emperor has turned away. Some say a political match is being arranged, and he must show favor elsewhere. Others whisper that someone has planted a doubt in his mind, a comment about her family's background, or an accusation whispered in the right ear. Historians still argue whether such changes in favor were ever truly spontaneous or always the result of deliberate maneuvering by rivals. You notice she doesn't seek out the emperor in the following days. She doesn't send messages, doesn't make herself visible in his usual haunts. Instead, she shrinks her world to a few familiar spaces: her quarters, the garden, the embroidery halls. It's a retreat, but not a surrender. The walls she's building now are meant to last. In the evenings, the harem still gathers for entertainment: singers, dancers, storytellers, but she no longer sits in the center. She chooses shadowed corners where she can watch without being watched too closely. It's here you see the change in her. The stillness is the same, but the intent has hardened. One night during a performance of a Persian love tale, a singer begins a verse about a lover waiting at a closed door, her lamp burning low. The women around you lean forward slightly, all of them aware of the symbolism. You glance toward her. She's threading a bead, her face unreadable. But when the singer moves into the next verse about the same lover blowing out her lamp and walking into the dark, her fingers pause just long enough for you to notice. The zenana feeds on moments like this. By the next morning, 3 women have accidentally mentioned in your hearing that she was seen thinking too deeply during the performance. In a place where perception is as important as fact, even silence can be turned into a story. Days pass, and her absence from the emperor's wing becomes normal. You start to wonder if she will fade entirely, if the girl from nowhere will simply vanish the way she arrived. But then you see her in the outer garden speaking to one of the eunuch guards, a man known to serve as the eyes and ears of the emperor's mother. They speak briefly, the conversation low, and when they part, she does not look back. That night, her lamps burn later than usual. Through the screen, you see her seated on the floor, sorting through a small lacquered box. She lifts out a folded piece of cloth, the indigo sari she wore the first time the emperor noticed her, and runs her fingers over it before laying it aside. One by one, she removes other small tokens: the ivory comb, the turquoise anklet, a dried sprig of jasmine. Each is placed back into the box with care, as if arranging an archive no one else will ever see. It's not mourning, it's inventory. The rains have ended now, leaving the air sharp with the scent of dust and stone. Festivals begin, occasions that pull the harem into the open spaces of the palace, where the public can glimpse them from behind the jolly screens. She attends wearing colors again, but never bright ones. She smiles at the right moments, bows when expected, and otherwise leaves no opening for fresh rumor. You start to think of her as someone who understands tides. She's let this one go out knowing it may come back in, and if it doesn't, she will already be ready for the next shore. Still, the sound of those closed doors lingers. In the zenana, they echo louder than anything else. The day she leaves the emperor's palace is not marked by ceremony or scandal. No public dismissal, no guards escorting her through the gates. Instead, it happens the way a shadow moves across a courtyard, slow, unnoticed at first, until you realize the light has changed. Her departure is framed as a transfer to a country haveli, a residence technically still part of the imperial estate, but far enough from the capital to make her irrelevant to court life. It's the sort of posting that can be spun as an honor, a reward for her devotion, some will say, but everyone in the Zenana knows what it means. Exile. Mainstream historical fact. Mughal emperors often moved consorts or wives to distant residences when they fell out of favor. These havelis could be comfortable, even luxurious, but they were politically dead spaces. The woman was still supported by the crown, but her influence was gone. When the eunuchs arrive to oversee the move, she doesn't protest. She lets them pack her belongings into lacquered trunks, the silk saris folded in neat stacks, the miniature paintings wrapped in cloth, the box of small tokens from her months in favor. The silver anklet goes into the bottom of the last trunk under a layer of shawls, the quirky tidbit. In some cases, a woman in her position would secretly leave behind a token, a comb, a piece of jewelry, a small embroidered cloth in the palace hidden in a wall or under a floor tile. It wasn't superstition. It was a quiet claim to say I was here. I may come back. You don't see her do it, but you wonder if she does. The journey takes 2 days. The palanquin sways gently over uneven roads, the curtains drawn tight to keep the dust out. Through the narrow slit of an opening, you glimpse fields of millet, small villages, the slow silver of a river. The air smells different here, less of rosewater, more of wood smoke and wet earth. The haveli is large enough to be called a mansion by village standards. Its walls are painted with faded floral patterns, its courtyard shaded by a massive neem tree. There are servants to attend to her cooks, to prepare her meals, and a small garden that blooms stubbornly against the dry air. On the first night, she sits on the veranda listening to the frogs in the garden pool. No music, no laughter, no footsteps beyond her own. Historians still argue whether such exiles were meant as punishment or as a way to protect women from harsher political reprisals. In her case, the line between mercy and dismissal feels razor thin. At first, she keeps to her old habits, rising early, bathing, dressing in fine saris, even when no one will see them. She walks the garden paths, keeps her embroidery neat, writes in the evenings by lamplight. But slowly, the urgency fades. The saris are simpler now, the embroidery less precise. Some mornings, she doesn't leave her bed until the sun is high. The letters from the palace are rare. Once a note arrives from one of her former attendants, full of harmless gossip, who wore what at the last festival, who was seen at the emperor's side. Another time, a brief message from a merchant who once served the palace, the emperor is well. The city is loud with weddings. She never replies. The seasons turn. Monsoon comes and goes, the neem tree dropping its yellow flowers into the pool. She learns the rhythm of the countryside, the farmers calling to their oxen at dawn, the women drawing water from the well, the distant ring of a temple bell. Life here is slow, repetitive, and utterly removed from the politics that once defined her every move. Yet she watches the road. Always the road. From her veranda, she can see the curve where it disappears behind a stand of tamarind trees. She doesn't say it aloud, but you can tell some part of her expects a messenger to appear there one day, bringing news that she is to return. Months pass. The garden becomes overgrown. The paint on the haveli walls peels in the sun. She spends more time sitting than walking, more time staring than speaking. The servants keep their distance, respectful but careful. They know she is not their mistress in any permanent sense. She is the emperor's discarded shadow, housed here until the court forgets her name entirely. One evening, as the sun bleeds into the horizon, she asks for the box of tokens from the palace. She opens it slowly, lifting each piece, the ivory comb, the dried jasmine, the turquoise anklet. She sets them on the low table in front of her and stares at them for a long time. Then, without a word, she wraps them all in a length of plain muslin and tucks the bundle into a corner of the chest. It's not surrender exactly. It's more like sealing away a part of herself she doesn't need to carry every day. Life in exile has its own dangers, not from rivals, but from forgetting how to be part of a world that once revolved around your survival skills. Here, there are no games to play, no seating hierarchies to decode, no glances to interpret. Here, you simply exist. And for someone like her, that might be the cruelest punishment of all. Years begin to blur. At first, she marks them by festivals. Diwali brings the brief sparkle of oil lamps along the Haveli's verandas. Holi paints the garden in faint stains of pink and green that linger on the stone. The monsoon swells the pool beneath the neem tree, its yellow flowers floating in clusters like drifting stars. But as time stretches, even these markers lose their precision. The festivals come and go with the same quiet regularity as the turning of the moon, and she stops counting how many she has spent here. Mainstream historical fact. For women exiled from the Mughal Zenana, years away from the capital often meant years erased from the official record. Without public appearances, without mention in court chronicles, their existence faded into the private memories of servants' neighbors, or if they were lucky, a single sympathetic scribe. She adapts in ways she never expected. Her silks, once folded in perfect stacks, are worn thin from daily use. Some are cut down into scarves for the servants' children. The silver anklet remains in its muslin wrap, tucked away in the chest, untouched. Her hair, once oiled and coiled with precision, is now braided loosely streaked with strands the color of ash. The quirky tidbit. In some rural estates under Mughal rule, women in her position would quietly take up roles in local disputes, mediating arguments between tenant farmers, advising on marriage matches, even overseeing the repair of irrigation systems. It was a shadow form of governance never recorded, but deeply felt in the villages around them. She takes to walking the perimeter of the estate in the mornings, a shawl draped over her head against the early sun. The farmers greet her respectfully, though most do not know exactly who she once was. To them, she is simply the lady of the Haveli, the one who listens without interrupting, who sometimes leaves extra grain in a family store after a bad harvest. Historians still argue whether such acts were survival strategies, ways to build loyalty in case of a political return, or simply the natural settling of someone who had nowhere else to direct her attention. Inside the Haveli, time slows even more. She begins keeping small notebooks, their pages filled with sketches of the garden lists of which flowers bloom in which month, fragments of poems she remembers from the palace. Sometimes she writes letters she never sends addressed to no one, or perhaps to everyone she once knew. The act of writing seems to be enough. Her closest companions now are the older servants, those who have been here as long as she has. One, an elderly woman named Ziba, sits with her in the courtyard during the long summer evenings. They speak little content to watch the light fade from gold to deep indigo. Ziba hums songs from her childhood, and sometimes the girl from nowhere hums along her voice, barely above a whisper. The road beyond the tamarind trees still holds her attention. She watches it most intently in winter when the dust settles and the air is clear enough to see riders from far off. Messengers do come occasionally, but never for her. They bring tax records, legal decrees, or invitations to festivals she will not attend. One spring, a letter does arrive, sealed in red wax. It is from a distant cousin, news of a death in the family, someone she barely remembers. The letter mentions, in passing, that the emperor is aging and that the palace has grown quieter. She reads it twice, folds it neatly, and places it in her chest alongside the wrapped muslin bundle. She does not speak of it again. Seasons continue to turn. The neem tree loses branches in a storm. The pool dries to a shallow mirror in a particularly harsh summer. She begins to spend more time indoors, her walks shortening to slow laps around the shaded verandas. Occasionally, she hears of changes in the capital, a new favorite in the zenana, a shift in the emperor's ministers, a festival cancelled due to illness. These details reach her like echoes, distorted and faint, yet they still have the power to stir something she cannot quite name. In the village, she is now a fixed part of the landscape, like the Haveli itself. Children grow up knowing her as the quiet lady who lives behind the high walls. They invent stories about her, that she is a sorceress who can call rain, that she was once married to a king, that she is waiting for a ship to take her away. None of them are entirely wrong, and none of them are right. By the 12th year, her hands have grown thin, the skin marked with fine lines. She still writes in her notebooks, though the script is smaller now, the ink lighter. She still tends to the garden, though her steps are slower, her time outside shorter. There is a kind of peace in this life, but it is not the peace she once imagined for herself. It is the peace of surrender not to another person, but to time itself. The days are no longer battles to be won or lost. They are simply days to be lived. And yet the road remains, always the road. Even on days when her legs ache and the air is too hot to move, she will sit where she can see that curve beyond the tamarind trees, watching, waiting. Not because she believes the messenger will come, but because part of her still wants to be the first to know when the dust begins to rise. The message comes on the back of a caravan. It's early morning when the riders appear at the curve of the road, their silhouettes wavering in the heat rising from the earth. At first it looks like nothing unusual, a small group of traders with pack animals perhaps stopping for water before moving on. But the lead rider breaks away and heads straight for the Haveli gates, the sun catching on the brass clasp of his satchel. You're in the veranda when the guard announces him. His face is lined from the road, his clothes dusty from travel. He bows not deeply, but with the slight hesitation of someone delivering news whose weight he understands. The emperor is dead, he says. The words land like a stone dropped into a still pond. No ripple of grief crosses her face. She is silent for so long that you wonder if she heard him at all. Then she nods once, as if confirming something she had already known in her bones. Mainstream historical fact. The death of a Mughal emperor was both a personal and political earthquake. Succession disputes could erupt instantly, with brothers, sons, and nephews vying for the peacock throne. For women once tied to the emperor by marriage favor or even scandal, it could mean release, recall, or permanent erasure. The messenger continues, his voice steady but careful. The new emperor has been crowned one of the old emperor's sons, though not the one she would have expected. There is no mention of her name in the transition orders, no summons, no instructions. But the palace, he adds, is remembering old debts and settling accounts. The meaning is left to her to decide. The quirky tidbit. In some Mughal courts, the death of an emperor triggered the redistribution of his personal household servants, reassigned possessions catalogued, and women in his harem either transferred to the care of the new ruler or given stipends to live out their days elsewhere. The choice was rarely theirs to make. She thanks the messenger, dismisses him, and sits for a long time without moving. Outside, the neem tree hums with bees. The air feels heavier. Finally, she rises and walks to her chest, the one holding the muslin-wrapped bundle. She unwraps it for the first time in years, laying out the contents on the low table, the ivory comb, the dried jasmine, the turquoise anklet, the indigo sari folded small. That evening, she writes a letter. The words are few, the lines even. When it is sealed, she sends for the same messenger and instructs him to deliver it to the palace. There is no name on the outside, only the emblem of the peacock throne drawn in ink. Historians still argue whether women like her, far from the capital, could influence events after such a long absence. Some suggest they were merely relics of a former reign. Others believe they could still sway alliances quietly, especially among servants and retainers who had once been loyal to them. Days pass before a reply comes. This time it is not a letter, but an escort, 2 eunuchs in palace livery arriving with a small covered carriage. The order is simple: she is to return to the capital. She packs little. The muslin bundle goes into her trunk, along with 3 saris, her notebooks, and a single silver bangle. The rest she leaves behind for the servants, her only parting words to Zeba being, "Water the jasmine in the west garden." The journey back is slower than her exile had been. The road is crowded with travelers heading toward the city, merchants hoping to curry favor with the new ruler, petitioners seeking justice, performers chasing the coin that flows more freely in times of change. She keeps the curtains of the carriage half drawn, watching the dust rise behind the wheels. When the city finally appears on the horizon, it feels both familiar and foreign. The domes gleam in the afternoon sun, the Yamuna River curves like a ribbon of silver, and the air is thick with the scent of spices, smoke, and humanity. The palace looms larger with each turn, its white marble walls still holding the same carved screens, the same guarded gates. But she does not go to the Zenana. Instead, the carriage winds through quieter courtyards, stopping before a smaller marble building on the edge of the complex. It is beautiful, but it is not a place of the living. It is the royal women's burial ground. One of the eunuchs explains without meeting her eyes, the new emperor has ordered certain matters of inheritance to be settled, and in that process she will be placed where she belongs. Whether that means entombment after death or symbolic burial, now he does not clarify. She stands before the building, the air cool in its shadow, and says nothing. The muslin bundle is in her hands. Slowly, she opens it and lays the contents on the stone step. The anklet, the comb, the jasmine, the folded indigo sari. For a moment, the city noise fades. All that remains is the quiet hum of the bees in the palace gardens beyond the walls. The burial ground is quieter than she remembers any place in the capital being. The walls enclose it in a kind of muffled stillness, muting the city's noise to a low, steady murmur, like the hum you hear before falling asleep. The domes above the tombs curve into the sky, their marble inlaid with faded vines of red sandstone. Beneath each dome lies a queen, a consort, or a favored daughter, names once spoken in court with reverence, now carved into stone that the wind slowly erodes. They do not take her to a living chamber. Instead, she is led to a shaded alcove where the eunuchs set down her small trunk. They speak politely, but their words are careful, almost rehearsed. She is to reside here until further arrangements are made. No one says how long that will be. Mainstream historical fact. Some Mughal royal burial complexes had quarters for caretakers, rooms for the living adjacent to the tombs, so that prayers could be recited daily over the graves. Women fallen from favor could be placed there under the guise of piety, effectively removing them from court life without the spectacle of public disgrace. She is given one of these rooms. It is narrow with a single jolly window that filters the sunlight into patterned fragments. From where she sits, she can see the edge of a white marble cenotaph in the next chamber. The stone glows faintly in the afternoon light, as if it's lit from within. The quirky tidbit. In some Mughal tombs, the cenotaph you see above ground is not the actual grave. It's a symbolic marker, while the true burial lies in a crypt directly beneath it, accessible only through hidden stairways or sealed doors. To the living, this meant the person's presence was both visible and unreachable, much like the fate of women sent here while still alive. Her days here are measured by the call to prayer from the nearby mosque. At dawn, the caretaker's wife brings her tea. At sunset, the same woman returns with a small meal of lentils, bread, and fruit. She is not forbidden to leave the burial ground, but she is discouraged from doing so. The city is just beyond the gate, yet it feels as distant as the villages she once passed in exile. Historians still argue about the intentions behind such placements. Was it an act of mercy keeping her in the comfort of marble walls and shaded gardens? Or was it a final act of erasure, placing her among the dead before she was gone herself? She walks the gardens in the mornings, her steps tracing the same loops between flowering shrubs and the water channels that crisscross the courtyard. The air smells faintly of roses and damp stone. She sometimes pauses at the cenotaphs, reading the calligraphy aloud, letting the names rest on her tongue. Some she remembers from her early days in the Zenana women, whose laughter once filled the mirrored halls, whose embroidered saris brushed against hers in crowded corridors. Now their titles are barely legible, the marble softened by years of rain. In the afternoons, she sits in her room, writing in one of her old notebooks. The words come slower now, her hand unsteady. Sometimes she copies lines of poetry she remembers from court recitals. Other times she simply describes the shape of the light as it moves across the jolly screen. The notebooks are piling up again, but she keeps them neatly stacked in the corner, as if someone might one day read them. One evening, the caretaker's wife lingers after bringing her meal. She tells her quietly, glancing toward the gate, that the new emperor's court has little interest in the affairs of the previous reign. "They will forget you," she says not unkindly. Perhaps that is better. The words stay with her through the night. She lies awake, listening to the rustle of leaves outside the distant murmur of the city. She wonders if forgetting is truly better, or if it's just another way of being buried without ceremony. There are no visitors. Not from the Zenana, not from the court, not from the city. Weeks pass in this suspended state. She tends the small patch of jasmine by the garden wall, the same flower she once wore in her hair during evenings in the emperor's company. When they bloom, she places a few sprigs at the base of the nearest cenotaph, and then one afternoon she sees it, an empty plot of ground, being cleared in the far corner of the burial complex. The caretakers work quietly, marking the space with wooden stakes leveling the soil. No one tells her whose it will be, but the sight of it raw and open against the backdrop of marble draws her eyes each time she walks the garden. The implication is impossible to ignore. She begins to imagine her own cenotaph. Not its design, she knows it will be simple if it exists at all, but its placement. She imagines the flowers planted near it, the way the light will fall on it at dawn. She imagines the years erasing her name from the stone, the wind wearing down the letters, until there's nothing left but a shape. And perhaps she thinks that is the final act here, to live long enough to see the place where you will be remembered, and to know that remembrance itself will not last. The day it comes, there is no warning. No letter, no summons, no visit from the palace to announce her fate. Only the sound of the caretaker's wife at her door in the gray half-light of dawn, her voice low and almost apologetic. They want you ready by evening. She does not ask who they are. She already knows. In this place, orders arrive without faces. Mainstream historical fact. When royal women in the Mughal court died, whether still in favor or long since forgotten, the burial was often swift and quiet, particularly if politics demanded the space in the court be cleared for new alliances. In some cases, the process was so discreet that even their names were omitted from official inscriptions, leaving them as anonymous noble ladies in the records. She dresses slowly without haste, choosing a plain white muslin sari. Her hair, now almost entirely silver, is braided simply. There is no jewelry, no perfume. The only thing she takes from her trunk is the muslin-wrapped bundle, the anklet, the comb, the dried jasmine, the folded indigo sari. She holds it against her palm like a weight she has carried for decades, the quirky tidbit. In certain Mughal burials, It was customary to place a small cloth bundle inside the tomb, alongside the body personal items that were never meant to be displayed tokens only the deceased, or those closest to her, would recognize. To the outside world, they meant nothing. To her, they mean everything. The evening sun turns the marble of the tombs a deep gold as she is led into the garden one last time. The plot she had watched for weeks is ready now, a rectangle of freshly turned earth, bordered by low white stones. There is no crowd, no ceremonial music. Only the caretaker, his wife, and 2 attendants stand nearby. Historians still argue whether these nameless burials were acts of cruelty or simply the inevitable end for women whose lives had been tied entirely to an emperor now gone. Some point to the lack of inscriptions as deliberate erasure. Others claim it was an old tradition meant to ensure the soul's humility before God. She kneels by the open ground, placing the muslin bundle gently into the space where the cenotaph will later stand. For a moment she rests her hand on it, her eyes tracing the shape of the setting sun through the lattice of the garden trees. There is no trembling, no tear, only a stillness that feels like the closing of a long-held book. When she straightens, the caretaker asks if she would like a marker, a simple one without name or date. She shakes her head. No, let them wonder who I was. And with that, she steps back. The attendants move quietly, laying the first stones that will form the base of her cenotaph. She watches until the light fades and the shadows of the garden merge with the white of the marble. Then she turns and walks toward her small room, knowing she will not see the finished stone in the morning. That night, the city beyond the walls is loud drums, voices, the sharp crackle of fireworks from some celebration she will never learn the reason for. Inside the burial ground, the air is soft, the scent of jasmine drifting from the flowers she planted months ago. She lies down without lighting her lamp, her body sinking into the cool weave of the cotton bedding. She does not dream. In the weeks that follow, the cenotaph is completed, a simple white stone, smooth and unmarked, standing among the others whose names are half gone. Visitors will pass it without pause. Children will play in its shade, not knowing the woman beneath once walked the mirrored halls of the zenana, once sat at the emperor's side, once learned the dangerous art of surviving without being seen. The stone will weather. The garden will shift. The neem tree will drop its yellow flowers across the marble every spring. And slowly, as the years turn, the girl from nowhere will become not even a name, but a question. Perhaps that is how she wanted it. And now, as the night settles, let's leave her there beneath the white stone in the quiet garden, where the air is always scented with jasmine, and the sound of the city is no more than a hum in the distance. The cenotaph, smooth and unmarked, stands like a pause in history, holding the faint echo of a life once lived in silk and marble, now distilled into stillness. The moonlight falls across the garden paths, turning the water channels into ribbons of silver. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city continues in all its noise and movement, but here time has slowed to the gentle pace of the wind in the neem branches. Each petal that drops onto the marble seems to land without a sound, as if even gravity has agreed to tread softly in this place. It's easy to picture her walking here at dawn, the hem of her sari brushing against the dew-dark grass, her gaze steady on the line of trees at the edge of the horizon. You can imagine her pausing to listen, not for footsteps, not for summons, but simply for the quiet, the kind that carries its own kind of safety. And as you breathe slower, you can let the story's sharp edges soften. The palace intrigues, the sudden rises, the silent falls, they fade here. What remains is the rhythm of the garden, the cool marble under the moon, the scent of flowers that bloom whether anyone notices or not. So let your eyes grow heavy now. Your breathing match the slow sway of the neem tree's shadow. Somewhere in that half-dream space, you can walk those paths with her, unhurried, unseen, at peace.